Welcome back to the Battlefield 1 tier list series. Today we get into the first of the primary weapons, with the arsenal of the Assault class. I'm Professor Mem, and I'll be your guide on this journey of knowledge. But I will warn you, these ratings are based not just on stats, but also on my personal feelings towards the looks and animations, and also personal bias for certain playstyles. For the sake of not having to repeat myself a ton, most guns in the game have what is called a factory variant, or low weight for support or infantry for scout. This denotes a mostly unedited base model of the guns, whose biggest unique trait is that they have the best accuracy recovery. Basically, when you fire, your spread increases, even in aimed fire, and when you pause firing, that spread starts to decrease back to its base value. And these basic variants' spread recovers fastest. If I had to put it in practical terms, to the best of my understanding, basic variant guns are best at firing accurately controlled bursts. However, to me this advantage is not concrete enough and quite boring, so when given meaningful alternatives, I will usually reach for these basic variants dead last. Alright, let's get started. Model 10A. The Model 10A is one of the most extreme shotgun archetypes, being very slow and having high power, although to be honest that's not saying much. Shotguns are uniquely weak in this game, especially compared to Battlefield 5. Granted, it's spread across only 12 pellets, so it's actually like real buckshot, but the Model 10, which has the highest shotgun damage, has a max damage of 150 with all pellets connecting, while the max damage of the weakest shotguns in BFV is 230. The one positive thing that can be said is that the damage models of slug shotguns in this game are better, but across the board recoil is much higher. Speaking of which, the Model 10 has a slug variant which kills in one shot out to 11 meters, then two shots out to 55 meters, then has a minimum damage of 45. With a very good hipfire reticle, it's still quite comfortable to use up close. Very admirable utility out to medium range, though with rough handling. Unfortunately, none of the optical reticles are just right for long-range shooting in my opinion, but the dot is good enough for a slow-firing shotgun. Since the slug variant is such a significant shakeup, just like for Battlefield 5, I must award extra points to shotguns that have them. But back onto the buckshot variants. Hunter tightens the spread of the pellets. I want to clarify, it does not change the damage model sadly. Still, it's the only one of the two that I use. I think the utility of the factory variant is lost with such a low fire rate. The Model 10A is basically the longest range focused buckshot gun in the game, and this is the best way to lean into that. It only takes 8 pellets connecting to kill out to 14 meters, but you only have 12 pellets, so it's best to improve your chances of all of them hitting. You could theoretically kill in one blast out to 18 meters, but that's only if all pellets connect. And if you're still insistent on using a shotgun at ranges past that, the smaller cone of the Hunter variant and the superior minimum damage of the Model 10 will be helpful, but you're gonna have to pump out those repeated shots at a very slow pace while coping with crazy high recoil. Overall though, the Model 10A has the highest base shotgun capacity of 6 shells, and its more range-versatile nature, inclusion of a slug variant, and slow but powerful gunplay have typically made it my safe pick shotgun. The sound of working the pump action is crunchy, and the empty reload has an over-the-top one-handed pump to finish it off. It may be less externally interesting than the other pump-action shotgun in the game, but it's in my opinion more interesting in sound and animation. Overall, A tier. M97 Trench Gun. The Trench Gun fires almost twice as fast as the Model 10, though it does less damage. It also trades less vertical recoil for a little more horizontal recoil, and has a 5-shell capacity. Its 3 variants are Hunter, Backboard, and Sweeper. The Backboard variant goes into damage fall off 2 meters sooner, but has a good bit less recoil. But why does the Backboard have the same spread as the Hunter variant? Not just on the M97, it's the case on all Backboard variants. That kind of seems like a rough trade as a Hunter appreciator. All you're getting is a damage model that's better by a 2 meter difference for all of 8 meters before the damage models merge again, while having higher recoil. I think I can see why so many people use backboard shotguns. In practice though, you're dealing with a rough shot reset either way, and the damage difference is at the most crucial range for shotguns. But it just feels wrong. Speaking of feeling wrong, the Sweeper variant has a duckbill choke, flattening the spread pattern. The description claims that it uses smaller pellets, but the pellet count remains the same as always, 12. What has changed is that the damage has a higher differential and quite short range, being just as damaging as the Model 10 up to 10 meters, but falling off really badly, essentially being fast and powerful but only usable very close up. In this way, it's a lot like the Model 37 in Battlefield 5. All variants even get to fire quote-unquote automatically due to its ability to slam fire, although it should be mentioned the Model 10 could also slam fire but has no such bonus in-game. Its damage still falls below the 1 hit threshold earliest, after 13 meters, with the backboard doing so after 14 meters, and the Hunter after 16 meters. Because I am set in my ways, I still default to Hunter, but this spread of variants in general makes me feel just not right. With the exception of the Sweeper, it kind of looks like an underwhelming fence rider when compared to some other shotguns, but it's the only other magazine shotgun that can reliably kill in one shot. It doesn't give me the assurance that one shot from the Model 10 does, but at expected ranges its damage is almost as good, and it's faster. And while being similar, with the M97 coming out on top in a few places, it doesn't have a slug variant, and I still prefer the range and power of the Model 10. So the M97 Trench Gun is B tier for me. MP18. The MP18 is the quintessential SMG of this game, and it's fitting since it's kinda the only one that was really there in the war. Being the seed for almost all early SMGs, its layout, while awkward to outsiders, will be very familiar to anyone intimate with World War II games. The gun being held perfectly angled rather than awkwardly leveled is one of those things that just feels so right. It fires at a very comfortable 550 rounds per minute, and does damage as you would expect from an SMG, killing in 4 body shots out to 12 meters, ramping up to 7 shots at 31 meters. Having low recoil, 32 rounds in a fast reload, and a hipfire worthy of an SMG, I don't know how to put it other than this is probably the most usable automatic in the game. Assault is not a class with much range at all, but the MP18 is one of the farther reaching options, and it's still so easy to use in short range that you'll make short work of many threats. It's very accessible and a natural killer. The trench variant shaves down the hipfire radius by a third, making even distant targets easy to hit without aiming. Optical decreases aimed spread, but if you're going for that you may as well try the MP18 Experimental, which has a 30-round magazine and optical sight, and fires in bursts. It has less horizontal recoil and has better accuracy bonus than the optical, but only when standing still. The theme seems to be precision. It's one of only 2 guns in the game that have a burst, and quite frankly, the other one's shite. Although it should be noted, this burst-fire MP18 was made up for the game, and while that magazine may look to have a normal enough length, we need to remember that these are basically single-stack Luger magazines, and this one appears to have been based off of a mere 16-rounder. Doesn't bother me in game much, I don't mind the sleeker look it gives my gun while I try out some experimental bursting. All 3 of these variants have some worth to me, which says a great deal about the base gun itself. A tier. Automatico M1918. Jumping to a very different kind of SMG right off the bat, the Automatico fires very fast but is lighter on the damage. At 900 RPM it fires the fastest of any assault primary in full auto, but its hits to kill is always exactly 1 bullet removed from that of the MP18, and thus most other SMGs. No matter what range you're at, it will take 1 extra shot to kill with the Automatico than the MP18. The other details of note are that the magazine is smaller at 25 rounds, and that the base vertical recoil per shot is the same, but the horizontal recoil is higher. In sum, it's more effective in aggression and close-range performance, but fairly unforgiving at longer range, even though the recoil could be worse for a gun of this fire rate. Speaking of recoil, the Automatico M1918 has what is called a Storm variant, and this is one of the variants of all time. It reduces all recoil values, by a pretty nice margin too. The only thing is, on a gun like this, where using the sights at all is kinda just worse than hip firing, the potency of the buff is reduced. The Automatico Trench is a more matching setup. I'd say the Automatico Storm is a small buff to all firing performance, but the Trench is a larger buff to just hip firing performance, which will be your main focus with this weapon. Aesthetically, the top-mounted SMG magazine makes a flashy first impression, but after some time with this game, the gun seems comparatively less visually unique than other automatics. In gameplay and appearance, this gun is just like if somebody split a Ribeyrolles in half and dropped it into a carbine stock. And that's because that's exactly what it is. If it doesn't look like the Ribeyrolles in-game, it's because that VP is fake, but that's a story for a different project. Although, the guns that this was based off were all made semi-auto only, but I mean we gotta get our SMGs in the game somehow. Despite its unique place in the submachine gun spread, I find it underwhelming, mostly owing to the short range, and the fact that it's not especially the most efficient killer in this category. But I will be a fool if I don't admit that the Automatico M1918 is great for controlled short-range destruction. Though this has obviously led to its use as basically a shotgun alternative without the downsides, which creates a feeling of cheapness depending on the circumstances, but it's far from the worst case of this. B tier. 12G Automatic. Aw, come on, what is this, Call of Duty? A shotgun that won't kill in one shot no matter how close you get? I always had my suspicions that this thing was weak, but I never realized that it doesn't matter how hard I tried. I was never going to get that one shot. Even at max damage, you're one pellet short of being able to kill in a single blast. Since buckshot doesn't have a headshot multiplier, there's no getting around it. But the trade-off is that this thing fires really fast. At 257 rounds per minute and low recoil, it's very spammable, and spam you must. With this weak sauce damage model, it's a good thing the variants give you provisions to get more pellets on target. A 5-round capacity by default, the unique extended shotgun variant upgrades it to 7, making it less unfortunate that you have to spend more shells to do the same job as any other shotgun. The spread radius on this one is the same as the Hunter version of the Model 10, with the spread on the Hunter and backboard variants of the 12G being the narrowest of all shotguns. I suppose you could say it's more consistent damage and less burst damage, and it's still powerful enough to dominate in close quarters, but specifically this shotgun is going to lose against other shotguns. With all of this stuff considered, it almost starts to balance itself out, but it's just not right to me. I recommend actually using sights more often with a 12G auto, because without doing so it seems more difficult to hit the follow-up shots. It's blisteringly fast for what I'm used to in shotguns, and of course I still have trouble getting used to the damage. I only really use this if I feel like doing something that I consider to be downright weird. D tier. Hellriegel 1915. Back to a normal damage model, pretty much being the same as the MP18, this gun is still far from normal itself. Like a submachine gun version of a belt-fed MG, it can even overheat after firing too many shots without letting the barrel cool. It has a high capacity, wider hipfire, water jacket, and low recoil like it's steadied by its own weight. That vertical recoil is actually the best for this damage model, and the only SMG with lower per shot recoil is the Storm variant of the Automatico. Given the fire rate being 650 rounds per minute, this thing definitely looks like a laser beam. Despite firing faster than the MP18, it's practically just as easy to keep level. Difference in ammo availability, if not negligible, is favorable to the Hellriegel, since I'd rather have more ammo and a slower reload at this trade-off ratio. However, using the Hellriegel always felt not quite as easy as it should have been on paper. That's because some handling aspects team up to stop this thing from being truly blissful through and through. Namely, the wide hipfire is quite unbecoming of a submachine gun, and not especially helpful on a gun firing this speed, and the horizontal recoil is kinda high relative to the vertical recoil, giving your sights more side-to-side displacement than expected. Also, despite being called a factory variant, the Hellriegel 1915 factory doesn't have the improved accuracy recovery. But hey, it's still good stuff. And I guess there's also a defensive variant that has a bipod and 120 rounds in the magazine instead of 60, but it has a lot more recoil in exchange for this. Cringe. Just stay away from that one, bro. Battlefield 1 is basically what made the Hellriegel. Before this game, nobody knew about it because it practically never existed. It takes some artistic license to make the gun usable, and to make the gun at all, considering they had no way to accurately model it 100%, but I think they did a very good job. It's so distinctive that you can't help but appreciate it. You'll definitely be relying on your sights a lot more than hipfire with this one, but I think you'll find it's not a problem at all. A tier. Sjögren Inertial. This is a shotgun that on paper makes the M97 Trench Gun look slightly pointless. The Sjögren fires a bit faster while having slightly lower maximum and minimum damage, but its combined vertical and horizontal recoil control is only beaten by the 12G auto backboard. The factory version to me seems outright better than the M97 backboard because it has less recoil and actually barely beats its one-hit kill range, all while having a very tight spread. The spread on the factory variant is the second tightest in the game, but the thing is, it only barely makes it into the one-shot kill squad. A few misaligned pixels and you may not be able to get the expected kill on a full health opponent. The only other variant is the Sjögren Inertial Slug, which instead of being a one-hit wonder like the Model 10, is more like a brutish DMR. With a maximum damage of 75 and a minimum of 34, the Sjögren can kill in 2 slugs out to 45 meters, then 3 after that. With its comparatively forgiving recoil, it honestly may be the better slug shotgun if you're not concerned with very close range. But then, compare it to the RSC from Medic. I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's a rifle with much better handling that also takes 2 shots to kill, and has better range. The only advantages are its hipfire radius, and higher max damage allowing for one-tap headshots, and potentially helping against an already injured enemy. But who wants to deal with recoil this high when you need to land repeated shots on someone, especially at close range? I swear, sometimes I think about the slug variant's stat spread and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Overall, the Sjögren shotgun with its 2 variants manages to be more interesting than the trench gun with its 3, and part of that is also thanks to the action. Coming from Battlefield 5, the sound of the bolt closing being more scrapey and metallic than plastic sounding is an upgrade. In this game it has a good bit more of an identity for itself, but it feels less reliable than using buckshot from an M97 or a slug from a Model 10. In concept I like it more. In practice, it falls short. C tier. Ribeyrolles 1918. My old friend, it's so good to see you again. Despite being clumped in as an SMG for mysterious dev reasons, the stats are definitely doing a thing where they basically take the MP18 and push it in a more assault rifle-y direction. It has the same fire rate, but a wider hipfire like the Hellriegel, it has a faster muzzle velocity, and the two guns' damage models start off in the same place but diverge the further you go, with the Ribeyrolles taking one less shot to kill at 23 meters and further. The bigger downside for this, though, is the increased recoil. Since the gun isn't technically better at close range, this higher recoil only makes it harder to use in the one place it does have an advantage, which is farther ranges. However, the Ribeyrolles does come stock with a bipod, and while it doesn't always feel like something you want to go for, since the Ribeyrolles doesn't have the range damage of a machine gun, using it with a bipod deployed makes it insanely stable, and this is perhaps the most sensible assault primary you'd want to use one with. Also, it should be noted that at times the recoil looks worse than it is. It may bounce the sights a lot, but they seem to come back down before they fire, far enough that they're just fine to use. So it has all of these mild advantages, but while taking a hit to two of the most important stats for actually landing shots, recoil and hipfire, and on a weapon that's already slow in TTK, landing the shots that you fire is important. But you know, I have flip-flopped on the Ribeyrolles in this game. Coming from Battlefield 5, I wanted to use it, hoping it felt the same, but it didn't. In fact, it felt slightly difficult. So I mostly ignored it in favor of SMGs, occasionally trying it again to mixed results, and finally going harder into it for my research in this video, and having no major issues when using it. It's cutting it really close to being worse than the MP18, but since the bipod is present and makes it such a laser beam and possibly the best ranged weapon for this class, I'm going to have to put the Ribeyrolles in A tier. Model 1900. By far the classiest feeling shotgun to use, the Model 1900 has the exact damage of the Model 10, with its recoil being distributed a bit differently from vertical to horizontal, but overall just as intense. Being that this is a double barrel, it has much lower ammo availability, but a much faster fire rate. It only has a factory and slug variant, so you can't get buckshot quite as narrow as the Model 10, but somehow the shotgun ends up being almost ideal for how I use it. 2 rapid-fire shots of this power are about all I need at any instant. It requires some more careful timing, but it gives more insurance in the moment of combat. The slug variant uses normal sights, as opposed to the Galilean-style optical sight found on the other slug shotguns. The optical sight has its advantages in clarity, but the ring also obstructs a lot around what you're aiming at. Personally, I think the Model 1900 irons are superior for firing slugs out of this gun. It's the slug shotgun that feels least clumsy to land shots with. The single shell reload is fairly long, so only do it when safe. If you're still in a fight, it's probably best to look for a good chance to pop off the other shell and get that shorter reload, even if you know it means leaving yourself with only one shot. One last thing to note, the Model 1900 is a 2-trigger shotgun, and accordingly there is a fire mode to expend both barrels at the same time. Or at least, nearly at the same time. In practice, they fire sequentially and your second shot will almost always fly ineffectually high, since it's right after the recoil from the first shot hits and offers no time at all to reset. The vast majority of the time you'll be wasting your ammo and what could have been a valuable second shot by doing this. As for looks, I mean, you know what a double barrel shotgun is. Of all the games to have them, this is one where a nice long-barreled one feels appropriate, even if historically it's not. The full brass shells sell me on the high power. It's encroaching on the Model 10's territory of my go-to shotgun. Something I haven't really been conscious of, but I think helps a ton on a gun like this, is that out of all shotguns it recovers after recoil the fastest, making its follow-up shots, or just follow-up shot I should say, a lot easier to land, and generally makes firing feel a lot less horribly awkward. Yeah, it's a new favorite. S tier. SMG 0818. Like the Type 2A of Battlefield 1, this is a weapon maligned by a large section of the community, largely due to its fast TTK afforded to it by a high fire rate, with handling and a capacity that makes spamming easy. If I put it in a low tier based on that, I'll have people nodding along in agreement and understanding, but I'll also have people who use the thing and don't understand the concept of guilt or that I'm standing on principle, who'll think I'm a recessive-brained homunculus for not understanding that it's so good. In truth, it's not as oppressive as the Type 2A was in Battlefield 5, but there is a dedicated server that bans it, as well as using any kind of mortar or the Ilya Muromets plane, two of the other most hated objects in the game. There is demand not to have to deal with these things, and I should know, I got like half of my clips for this video on that server. Alright, to actually explain this thing, it has the same damage as the MP18, feeds using 80 rounds of clips, and has the wider hipfire of the Hellriegel and Ribeyrolles, and fires at 770 rounds per minute. The recoil, while appropriate for its speed, is on the slightly higher end, and in conjunction with the hipfire spread, makes it best for relentless spraying at closer range, although the capacity gives you the freedom to just throw enough bullets at medium range problems until they're solved. Just be careful not to overheat. The greatest appeal is that this is the fastest TTK submachine gun that still has good ammo availability. There are faster automatics with this kind of damage profile, but they correlatively limit your ammunition. Fast TTK plus ease of use is where the sweats will feel most comfortable, and those who don't want to put forth much effort will also find this appealing. Hence, I have an aversion to the SMG-08. Design-wise, it's ugly as sin and awkward, but mechanically interesting. With a very rare feed system, although it's so hard to understand from the game's depiction alone, it just feels like the magazine is a magic box that turns a plate of 9mm into fired rounds. And I don't know what's going on with this reload. I doubt the gun had a modern bolt release. When this weapon was first released, it actually had a fire rate of 450 and likely lower recoil. Now I wish I had that gun. I'd probably love it. Super controllable sustained fire SMG. I don't really feel a need to use this. Part of it is my hipster avoidance, but also if I want an LMG-SMG hybrid for sustained fire, I'll take the low recoil of the Hellriegel, and if I want fast close-range killing, I'll use one of the more extreme and challenging SMGs with tighter hipfire. D tier. Maschinenpistole M1912 P16. Speaking of which, this is one such gun, the ultimate trade-off of TTK for ammo availability. Killing in as few as 4 body shots, it fires at 900 RPM, but has a non-detachable 16-round magazine, replenished by 8-round stripper clips and single rounds. Its recoil is also highest in class for the standard submachine gun damage model. And yeah, I'm calling it an SMG for simplicity, even though it's a machine pistol. It follows the curve of SMGs, it behaves like one, it's in their class. So, as good as a high optimal TTK may be on paper, I think many would scoff at this weapon. Especially since the version you probably unlock first, the experimental, is the worst version. It fires in 2-round bursts, which actually has a faster cyclic rate, firing both shots in 1/10 of a second, but the vertical recoil is even higher, worst of all SMGs, even worse than an SMG with a far stronger damage per shot. I can only recommend getting in close, and not even trying with the sights. It's a necessary evil to unlock the real prize, the Storm variant. When you keep humble, know that your fighting is pretty much just going to be close range. This can actually be an incredibly fun weapon to use. It melts in close quarters, pretty much overpowering any other SMG, or anything else for that matter. Just pace yourself with those reloads. This is like a double-barrel shotgun. It's not a full-on run-and-gun, it's a means to do an assload of damage in a short time, with deliberate resets between your aggression. In fact, it kind of fits the same role of shotguns, not having a chance for an instant kill, but with a bit more range and more predictably consistent damage, and if you ask me, easier to fire. These reloads ain't nothing to me, man. If anything, I like how these great animations give me something to look at. The empty one is especially cool. Speaking of reloads, you can cut it short by pressing the fire button. During active combat, I like to do this after putting in one stripper clip, for a more expedient though incomplete top-up. Who needs a reasonable capacity when you can create a narrow cone of death in front of you that doesn't even give anything in it the chance to think about moving? I know it's only because I use it exclusively in short-range situations, but the Maschinenpistole has never disappointed. I enjoy the challenge aspect of it, and the fact that so few other people use it. Call it a meme, call me crazy, I don't care. This one's A tier. M1917 Carbine. We've talked about 4-shot weapons, we've talked about 1-shot weapons, we've even had a few 2-shot weapons pop up, but this is the first of assault weapons that can kill in a minimum of 3 body shots. So what does the balance on that look like? Well, it's semi-automatic only, firing at 360 rounds per minute. It kills in 3 body shots out to 12 meters, but thereafter starts to merge closer and closer into nothing more than a normal SMG, down to the standard minimum damage of 15 at 33 meters, 7 shots to kill. It has a 40-round magazine with a fairly normal reload, but as I'm sure you can tell by now, this thing barely even moves when you fire it. It's the lowest recoil overall for this class, and the second lowest recoil of any small arm in the game that can kill in 3 shots, if I'm not mistaken. So it throws out any advantage of volume of fire over pretty much any SMG, but guarantees that the shots you fire are more likely to hit. Its muzzle velocity is in the higher range for assault, but that's not saying too much. It has the already good hipfire radius of most SMGs, and the trench variant has an expected effect, emphasizing the 3-shot ability of the carbine in close range to make up for its severe lack of fire rate, while also making it easier to hit further targets without really trying. Meanwhile, the patrol variant adds a short scope to make the most of your range, which still can't be much longer than medium because the accuracy, specifically accuracy while moving, is kinda uniquely horrible, but it's still worth it. If you want clarity on more distant targets, use the patrol. If you want a gun that exclusively handles like a dream, use the trench. This gun's optimal TTK is poor at pretty much all ranges, but that's just theoretical, based on the assumption that all shots hit. Really, I'm at times more efficient because I can spam and still have a high hit rate. It's more interesting than an SMG, and emphasizes 2 of my favorite qualities in Battlefield guns: versatility across multiple ranges and recoil control. S tier. RSC SMG. Now, the RSC looks at the M1917 Carbine, its whole 3-shot to kill thing, and it shows up all cocky saying, "Ha! I can do it better!" And it brings out a higher damage model, a faster bullet speed, a faster rate of fire, and it says, "Hell, I'll even do it in automatic." And what's the cost? Ha! Only a 8-round magazine that loads nice and slow, and recoil higher than anything on here that isn't a shotgun, or that awful burst fire machine pistol. So the RSC SMG has some strange qualities. In fact, I thought of it as something of a joke weapon before I was enlightened. The 8+1 capacity on an automatic is rough no matter how you slice it, but it fires at an easily regulated 450 rounds per minute, and it kills in 3 shots out to 20 meters, and has a minimum damage of 21.5, meaning without multipliers it only takes 5 shots to kill at worst. While it's still modest, it has the highest muzzle velocity and recoil is damn harsh, but not if you think of it like a semi-auto rifle with a higher damage differential. It all comes back to that small magazine and long reload though. Try to use it like an SMG and you'll run dry super fast, and self-loading rifles with this kind of damage seem to have more ammo and faster reloads. But I cannot argue with the results. At SMG ranges the TTK is really fast, and I can even call the damage reliable. Sure, there may be instances where I only finish them off with the last bullet of my magazine, but I rarely go over budget. The capacity is just right. At longer ranges, it's easy to slow down. This is one of those weapons that makes me play more consciously, and it usually somehow works out really well. It looks like nothing else, it doesn't really act like anything else either. I really do be feeling some kind of different way when I whip out this bad boy. It somehow is everything I want it to be. It's deadly in close range yet versatile enough for longer. It's a challenge without being a hindrance, and it's weird. This is the jank machine, and I'm something of a machine operator myself. What I can appreciate most about the RSC SMG is that no matter how unpopular, it does exactly what it looks like it does. Delivers rifle-level performance in a fucking awful package. S tier. Annihilator. The original Tommy gun is like a more moderate version of the Maschinenpistole 1912, firing slower at 830 rounds per minute. Ammunition availability is better but still limited with a 20-round magazine and slower than expected reloads. Its damage model is largely the same, only being the only SMG with a max damage of 30. In my last tier list, I failed to factor in the correlation between damage multipliers and the variance of max damage of all of the 4-shot to kill damage models. I figured against a full health enemy, the difference between 26.5, 28, and 30 damage didn't matter. But the thing is, headshots don't have a 2x damage multiplier. For these weapons, it's actually a 1.7x multiplier. That means only the gun that does 30 base damage can get over 50 on a headshot. The Annihilator kills in 2 headshots, whereas the others would require 3. If we're mixing headshots and body shots, the Annihilator can kill in 1 headshot and 2 body shots. The MP18, Ribeyrolles, and SMG08 can do the same, or 2 headshots and 1 body shot, and the Hellriegel and Maschinenpistole can also kill in 2 headshots and 1 body shot, but if you only land 1 headshot, you would still need 3 whole body shots to finish off a full health enemy. All that is to say, the Annihilator is the submachine gun where you get the most value out of headshots, and you can feel it in gameplay. Things can still get slightly more complicated if we factor in the 0.96x multiplier on arm and leg shots, but let's not go there. Alright, back onto the more broad topic at hand. The Annihilator is still very aggressive and pretty short ranged, but more accessible than the M1912 P16 with its better ammo and recoil. It only misses out on the sheer time to kill with body shots, and in my opinion, the fun factor. Also, the sights on the Annihilator are borderline unusable, just way too much movement. There are two variants of the Annihilator itself, Trench and Storm, but the M1919 SMG, a now unobtainable Battlefield 5 pre-order bonus weapon, is another early Thompson gun, deleting the Suomi KP31-like heat shield in favor of the standard barrel. It functions exactly as a factory variant of the Annihilator, so if you don't have it, you're not missing out on much. This is a gun that you often see in a similar role as the SMG-08, used by people who just want an easy time in close quarters, because it's one of those weapons that'll win you fights in tight spaces without you really having to try for it. It's not as common, but I still kinda resent it for that. And lastly, as someone who is more of an enjoyer of extremes, the Maschinenpistole M1912 P16 is more in line with my personal preferences, while being similar enough to almost overshadow the Annihilator, on top of being more interesting. It's a fine weapon, just rates lower for me cause personal reasons. C tier. Fromer Stop Auto. Mom, can we have Glock 18? No honey, we have Glock 18 at home. Glock 18 at home. A great starting point for understanding the Fromer Stop Auto is the Automatico M1918, since it has the same fire rate, as well as the same damage model until 30 meters where the Fromer falls off, but neither of these guns are really reaching out that far anyway. It has a smaller 15+1 capacity but super fast reloads. Because of these two factors, you'll most certainly be reloading on every kill, but that won't be much of a problem. It has a high recoil per shot, and a hipfire between the default and Trench SMG radii. But on a quick look, the Fromer seems easily worse than the Automatico, since the Trench variant has less recoil and tighter hipfire with more ammo. However, I like the Fromer Auto more. Why? Oh, it's because I'm a worthless hipster who reliably picks the less popular option? Well, yeah, but let me try to rationalize. Those fast reloads really equalize the ammo problem, and there are some more complex recoil-related stats that in practice make the Fromer less inconvenient to shoot. For one thing, all automatic guns have a first shot recoil multiplier, making the first shot of any given time you hold down the fire input jump more than subsequent shots. The Fromer's is on the low end, the same as the factory variant of the Automatico. There's also the recoil decrease stat, which resets your camera's rotation from recoil when you stop firing. The faster the better. This stat is higher and therefore better on the Fromer than on the Automatico Trench, though once again the factory variant comes up as having an even better recoil decrease stat. Okay, well, in whatever case, the Fromer Stop Auto is like a mix of a factory and Trench variant, so it has good hipfire but also better burst potential, and recoil control aside, which I know is saying a lot. Other obscure stats point to the Fromer being more accurate in aimed fire. At the end of the day though, it comes to this. Me and the boys just running around blasting with a machine gun. It's the experience of dumping 32 ACP from a one-handed weapon. And I mean, people don't look to this gun as a mainstay, but for me it is. Originally just for tankers and pilots, I don't think it was intended to be seen as an equal to the likes of the Automatico, but I believe the Fromer Stop is more fun precisely because of what it is. A tier. Sawed-off shotgun. Well, to be honest, this gun is pretty much just the Model 1900. Fun fact if you didn't already know, this gun was in the game from the beginning for the tanker and pilot classes. It was later added to Assault, and the 1900 was only released with the In the Name of the Tsar DLC. So yeah, despite being a very short shotgun, the damage model is the same, making its deadly range deceptively long. However, it has a wider shot spread, the widest of any shotgun. Its recoil is also closer to that of the Model 10, only pulling slightly more to the right, but it doesn't matter much with this much recoil in this little capacity. For the final significant difference, this shotgun reloads the same whether one or both barrels have been fired. Its reload speed is slightly slower than the Model 1900's empty reload, but still a lot faster than its single shell reload. Spiritually though, because this thing is so short, the assumptions it creates make me use it very differently from its full-size brother. To me, this is the ultimate shotgun of zooming around, throwing caution to the wind, just blasting. I suppose it makes sense slightly given the wider spread and more consistent reloads, but the difference is 70% psychological. To be honest though, since it doesn't have the extra points given by the slug variant, I've got to put it lower. Saws. A tier. This is a bit of a weird tier list all things considered, so let me try to parse out what exactly this all means. In S tier are some of my favorite weapons. The Model 1900 is very strong and works with my gameplay pace, the M1917 Carbine just ticks the right boxes for my specific tastes, and the RSC is a meme but actually really good. For A tier, these four are just really solid guns from a statistical standpoint, and these three are also some of my personal favorites, but I know they have too many limiting factors to be in S tier. In B tier is a pair of guns that are good and I like well enough when using, but they're overshadowed by some counterparts in A tier. The Automatico actually may have been higher if it weren't for my resentment of some sweaty close quarters players. C tier has the Sjögren, consistently not quite right even if it can hit some good streaks with its buckshot, and the Annihilator is a less extreme and more mainstream alternative to the M1912 P16, both of which are points against it to me. And to be honest, the Automatico makes for almost the same playstyle, but better for my tastes. The Annihilator is saved from being any lower by the fact that you can feel the impact of its increased headshot damage. Lastly, D tier, where we have the 12G automatic, perpetually feeling just wrong, and the oppressive SMG 0818, which I can actually rationalize my reason for not liking it as, it's a fence sitter between the Annihilator and the Hellriegel, both of which are actually compatible with my playstyles, while the SMG 08 is neither fast enough for run and gun, I mean come on, my standard is the Maschinenpistole, and it's got too much recoil for a sustained fire roll. But we know that anything I say is just copium for the fact that I don't like this thing's place in the meta. Nothing is lower than D tier because none of these have really awful stats, or at least I don't dislike any that do. And there is enough variety between designs and performance that there isn't anything that's drowned out by multiple alternatives. Even the weapons I dislike in retaliation to their popularity, none of them are as bad as the M2 Carbine, Type 2A, or ZH-29 of Battlefield 5. Alright, please keep in mind that this is all based on personal opinion. I don't know if I've ever had a tier list where that's more evident, and I've hopefully given you enough information to decide for yourself what you'd like, and whether my takes are deranged, if you didn't already have your own conclusions. Thank you for watching. I'll have the rest of this series coming out sometime in the future. I'm Professor Mem. Have a good night.